some pictures with you. So I will share my screen. As part of my professional development as an interfaith minister, I attended a week-long retreat in the town of Teotihuacan in Mexico in November 2016 to study the Toltec path of transformation. Some of you might be familiar with this magnificent pyramids outside Mexico City. Most visitors that come to Mexico City do visit the pyramids. Are about an hour away. I certainly was very familiar with them because I grew up in Mexico City. What I didn't know is that this tradition, the Toltec tradition, is really the mystical tradition that has been going through thousands of years in Mesoamerica. And it has been called different things in different places. It's still right now being held by some people, including Don Miguel Ruiz, which some of you might be familiar. He wrote a book called The Four Agreements. And Teotihuacan, which is about 2,000 years old, really was designed as an initiation site for priests and maybe priestesses in that tradition. So it holds a lot of history and a lot of beautiful power. So this retreat was really about getting to know this mystical underside of the Mesoamerican cultures, including the Aztecs, which came much, much later from this time. Interestingly enough, the retreat also coincided with the celebration of the Day of the Dead, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Dia de los Muertos, we call it in Spanish. And it's a time, November 2nd, when the veil between the living and the dead, the ancestors, is thought to be very, very thin, right? It coincides with Halloween and other celebrations around the world. And the way that it's celebrated in Mexico usually is that people go to cemeteries and create altars for their deceased ancestors and bring food and bring flowers. And it's a celebration, really, of the life of the ancestors. So for this retreat, we were asked to bring a photograph or photographs of ancestors in our lives that we wanted to celebrate as part of the Dia de los Muertos, because we were going to build one of those beautiful altars. So for me, when I heard that, immediately who came to mind was my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, Luis Alvarez Pastor, with whom I grew up. I grew up in a multi-generational household in Mexico City with my grandfather, my parents, my three brothers, and I. And my grandfather in some way was, at least in the first years of my life, my most primary parent. My father was working, my mother was very busy raising a family, and my grandfather was that presence, that blessing that I had in my life, where I could spend a lot of time with. His work was not to discipline me, but basically to just spoil me, right? So it was a wonderful thing. And I have incredible memories of him. Particularly, I remember he was a very large man. And I remember sitting in bed next to him watching TV. What I remember strangely is watching bullfights back then because he was from Spain. And it was the most blissful feeling as a child. Like he was like a living pillow next to me, you know, and it gave me such comfort to be able to experience that. And I was so grateful to him because he really gave me a sense of being deeply, deeply loved and really unconditionally loved. So that was part of my early years. He died when I was 8, and it was a devastating loss for me, as you can imagine. But that part of him I carry with me, as well as another one which in some ways is relevant to the work that I've been doing and that Susan was mentioning, which is looking at masculinity and how masculinity both privileged men but also hurt us in some ways. But my grandfather, what he taught me is that men could have a range of emotions, including sadness. I saw him cry several times openly. And I think that was an incredible gift that I still carry with me. Now, as Susan said before, in our families, we have these beautiful memories, most of us, hopefully. But there's also the other side, right? The hard stuff. And my grandfather, in addition to having all this love and all this light, he did have a big shadow on him. And he had several shadows. But the one that I would like to talk a little bit about is that is the shadow of white supremacy and racism. He grew up in Spain and came to Mexico and very much identified as a Spaniard in Mexico. And so did my family. Even though we don't use the vocabulary of being white, we were white in a country where most people were not. And we have all that white privilege that people have in this country. And in subtle and non-subtle ways, I received the message very clearly that we were better than others, that we were superior than others, right? Internalized white superiority, that's what I call it, racism. So that was a strong part of the legacy that I also received with him, in addition to sexism, homophobia, you name it, you know, all those things. And what happened when I was back in Mexico, after so many years I've been living in this country since I was 20. So I was back there in Teotihuacan trying to learn more about the spirituality of the indigenous people. And I wanted to honor my grandfather. And all of a sudden I felt this enormous, I only can call it a cognitive dissonance. Here I was trying to learn more and honor a heritage that basically my family taught me to look down on, and that my people, my ancestors, the Spanish, tried to destroy, right, in brutal ways. So I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? And this was pretty early in the week-long retreat. And one of the things that I decided to do, or came to me during meditation, is that I could honor my grandfather in all his complexity and the legacy that he gave me, both of light and shadow, and that I could also honor the atrocities that had happened in this land and that my ancestors had created. So I decided that I wanted to create an altar that had both of those things in it. So the day before the Day of the Dead, we went out to a market in Mexico. And if you've been to a Mexican market, it's a magnificent view of colors and smells, and all the senses are engaged. And we went there to get what we usually use for altars, flowers mainly, but also candles, these sugar skulls that we put in altars and so on. And we went to a nearby town called Otumba. And I walk every aisle of that little market looking for something that would symbolize the atrocities that my people have committed in that land. And I couldn't find anything, actually. I just, there was nothing there that for me symbolized that. So I was a little disappointed. I did buy what I needed to create my altar, and I had a little time to kill. So I went outside the market, I stepped out, and I saw in front of me that there was a little town museum. This is a very small town, but there was a little municipal museum there. And I said, well, I'll go visit the museum while other people finish their shopping. So I came into the museum, and lo and behold, the first thing that I saw was this amazing mural that depicted exactly what I was looking for. As you can see in the center of the mural, there's Hernán Cortés, which was the captain, the leader of the Spanish people, with his armies of Spanish and non-Aztec indigenous people that were, some of them were allies with him, basically massacring the Aztecs and other warriors. I was absolutely flabbergasted. And when I went and saw the little plaque next to the mural, I was even more flabbergasted, because that very town where I was, Otumba, and this is something that probably I learned in school but I have forgotten, but this very town was the place where the most decisive battle of the war between the Spanish and the Aztecs happened. Was an enormous massacre of the Aztec warriors by the Spanish, hundreds of them. And basically it was the end of the Aztec Empire as they knew it. After that, there was a siege in Mexico City, and as they said, the rest is history. So I had chills all over me that literally I was standing on the ground that probably had been soaked with blood of the Aztec indigenous people due to the violence and the atrocities of my people. And at that point, I started feeling very strongly that I was being guided in this journey, that everything was going to be falling into place that I needed to seek some healing of what had happened. So I ended up making my altar. There it is, both with my grandfather on one side and a little photograph of the mural, honoring both my legacy and also the victims of the atrocities that had happened. After I did that, I did feel some degree of relief, but I still felt that there was more I wanted to do. I still feel a lot of churning inside myself. And again, in meditation, what came to me is that I needed to offer a formal ritual apology to the indigenous people of Mexico. I had no idea what that meant, but again, as I said before, at that point I felt that I was being guided, so my job was to say yes, even though it felt scary. So I had a meal with one of the leaders of the retreat. He happens to be a Native American man from the US, and most of the participants in the retreat were people from the US and Canada. And this man, his name is Will Tagle, wonderful elder, very wise. I told him what was in my heart at that point. And immediately he said, wow, that would be amazing if we could put together some kind of ritual of apology. I will see what I can do. And I have to say that at that point, my anxiety and my fear started growing exponentially. I was like, oh my God, what am I getting myself into now? The cat is out of the bag, as they say, right? But again, I felt like my job was to just move forward and say yes. So the next day, Will came back to me and said, I had an idea of how this can happen, how we can make this happen. The last night, the last evening of the retreat, every year, because this is a retreat that happens yearly, every year we invite a group of Aztec dancers, or Mexica as they like to be called. The Aztec is more of a Spanish word, Mexica dancers, and really elders and shamans and carriers of the great Toltec tradition. And they graciously come to our retreat center and show us how the Toltec spirituality manifests today in Mexico. And it's mainly through ritual and through dancing. And so they create this beautiful, beautiful ceremony that we participated. And Will told me, so I have talked to the leader of the Mexica dancers, his name is Don Pedro Diaz, and told him about your idea of offering an apology. And he says that he was interested, that he wanted to hear more about it. So again, I felt like, okay, I was started to get even more afraid, and at the same time, even more trusting of the process, if you will. So the next day, I think, was the last evening of the retreat when that ceremony was going to happen. So we did whatever happened during the day. We visited the pyramids, we did some rituals, and after dinner, Will came to me and said, the Mexica dancers are setting up the ceremony, and Don Pedro would like to talk to you. So please come with me. So I took a big breath and I went to talk to Don Pedro. And this is what he looked like. This is not the photograph of that moment, but this is his ritual clothing. He was dressed in this amazing clothing that included this enormous headpiece. You cannot even see how tall it was. It was very, very big. And then he was wearing leopard or jaguar, really, skins, and had painted some jaguar spots on him because I think his spirit animal is the ocelotl or the jaguar. So I came in front of him and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? But there I was, and he just looked at me like, so what does this gringo want? Basically, that's probably what he was thinking. I started speaking in Spanish to him, and I could see that he relaxed a little bit, and I just told him what was in my heart, that I felt this desire to offer a ritual apology to the indigenous people of Mexico for the atrocities that my people have done. He just looked at me and said, okay, we'll make it happen tonight during the ceremony. I will call you and we'll offer you that opportunity. And then I left, joined the rest of the group as the Mexicas were finishing their preparations. And then eventually we were all called to join them. And the ceremony happened outside. They created this amazing altar that you can see there. Is all made of flowers. And it all has, of course, significance that I cannot quite remember right now, but we were told what that was. They had this fire that you can see there. And then they had these two very large ceremonial drums. This is not a great picture, but someone took this picture from a second floor. And you can see the altar there and the fire, and to the left are the drummers. And then there were like 12 or 13 Mexica dancers, men and women, all dressed in ceremonial costumes with the headpieces and so on. And they created one circle, and we created a second circle. Here we were just gathering, but then we created a circle. And then they started the ceremony, and as many people in the Americas do, they called the directions. They smudged everyone. And then the drummers start playing this wild rhythms, and the dancers start dancing. And if you have been in Mexico City, you might have seen them on the streets. Sometimes they create these ceremonies literally in the streets or in plazas in Mexico City. So they started dancing wildly with such energy and such passion that I could see that they were getting into a trance, basically. It reminded me of maybe Sufi dancing or other kind of ritual dancing that I have seen in my life. And it was amazing because there were people of all ages, including the elder there, which was probably, I would say, over 80 years old. And I'm telling you, I could not have done what he was doing in terms of the energy that he was putting into this. And eventually they invited us to join, and I could barely keep up. There's a lot of turning going back and forth and this and that, but finally we all got into it. And again, I think we all got into kind of this altered state of, I don't know how to describe it, of ecstasy. We kind of left our normal consciousness, and I think that's, of course, the purpose of something like that. And eventually, we started calming down. We all created a circle, and then Don Pedro released the directions. And usually, what that means in a ceremony is that the ceremony is over. It's time to end the ceremony. It's like a final prayer or something else. So actually, at that point, and of course, the whole time I had been thinking about what I was about to do, and honestly, I was feeling quite nervous. So at that point, when he released the directions, I actually thought that he had forgotten about the apology. And a part of me was really relieved about it. But of course he didn't. So once he released the directions, he asked the Mexica dancers to make a closer circle. And for the rest of the participants, the North American participants, to come outside that circle. And then he looked at me and he said, okay, come to the center of the circle. And I did. You can see me there. And you can see Don Pedro right in front of me. And the man on the right there is Will, the person who basically facilitated the ceremony. So I came right in front of Don Pedro. And he said, okay, go for it. And of course, I had thought a little bit about what I would say, but I decided not to script it and to really let it come to me, let it flow. So I will read what I remember saying. I wrote this right after the ceremony. It might not be literally what I said, but it certainly is the spirit of what I said. So there I was, looking right into Don Pedro's eyes. And I said in Spanish, my people, the Spanish, arrived in this land almost 500 years ago. We did not come in the spirit of peace. We did not come with our hearts open. We did not come to learn from this great culture. We came to conquest. We came to dominate. We came to subjugate, guided by greed, arrogance, hate, and a false sense of superiority. My ancestors were welcomed on this land, and we paid you back for your generosity by killing your men, raping your women, enslaving your children. We tortured, we mutilated, and we tried to destroy your culture, and we obviously failed. Today, I come with great humility, representing myself, my family, my ancestors, and my people, to offer an apology to you, your families, your ancestors, and all the people who have walked this sacred land from the beginning of time for all the atrocities committed by the Spanish. I come with an open heart. I come in the spirit of peace. I come with great humility to tell you how sorry I am for what happened. It deeply pains me to see the hurt and suffering caused by my people. And at that point, I felt I needed to go down in one knee, although, interestingly, Don Pedro didn't want me to, but I felt, yes, I have to. And I finished by saying, humbly, I ask you for your forgiveness, even if it is a small gesture compared to the enormity of the mayhem that took place here. Thank you for listening. And At this point, Don Pedro took my hand and pulled me up. And I looked right at his eyes. I will never forget in my life this moment. He was crying. I was crying. I think everybody was crying. And I just felt so much love coming from him. And what he said to me was that he never, in his wildest dreams, could have imagined that someone of Spanish ancestry would never mind apologize or even acknowledge the damage that had happened. And then he hugged me, heart to heart hug. And then he asked all the dancers to hug me too. So I went around the circle, one by one, gave me their blessing. This was the 80-year-old. And then we really closed the ceremony. The elder actually offered a beautiful poem in Nahuatl, which is the indigenous language of the Mexicas, that I was able to translate to, well, it was translated to Spanish and then to English. And then some of the North American folks offered a song, and then we'll close the ceremony by playing the conch. And we said our goodbyes to the dancers. We started walking away, and various people from the North American group came to me and shared with me how moved they had been by the ceremony. I strongly believe that this was a collective experience. I just happened to be in the center, but we all created it together. And as I was almost leaving, a woman who was a participant in the retreat, she's a Native American, Native Canadian actually, came to me and said, this might seem very strange to me. This is someone whom I have not talked to during the week. We didn't know each other. She didn't know anything about my story. And she said to me, this might seem really strange to you, but I have received a message, and I feel that someone is telling me, literally almost pushing me towards you to give you the message, and I have no idea what it means, but I feel I really need to tell you. And I said, sure, go ahead. And she said, the message is, you are a beautiful grandson. At which point I just hugged her and totally lost it, started wailing. And it was very beautiful because so many people came around me and just held me in a way that reminded me of the love of my grandfather. So thank you so much for listening to my story. As Susan mentioned, we are going to have a courageous conversation at noon, in which I would like to start with a short guided meditation, and then open the circle to whatever people have in their hearts and want to share, either about the ceremony or the meditation. Again, thank you so much for having me here.